Let me just talk about sawing really quick. So this is your basic saw frame, jeweler's saw frame. There's, they come in many different sizes, and the sizes refer to the depth here, or the throat as it's referred to. So notice that this is a lot larger than this, the depth here, and that basically allows you to get into larger pieces of metal. Meaning if I had a piece of metal that was the size of this, that I could saw in the middle of this and still actually move all the way around with that saw frame. But if I was using this saw frame, if I try to be in the center, I'm gonna hit here. So that's why many different sizes are available. This is your standard size right here, which is about 3 to 4 inches. And that's what we're gonna be using today. I think it's a good place to start. They actually do get smaller, but usually I find that this is a good place to start. So we're gonna be using 3/0 saw blades, which are these tiny little guys right here. Get a close-up on that. So these blades, even though they seem super tiny, are very powerful. Blades come in many different sizes, and that's something I can get into later if we have time, but we're using 3/0. So to see how the teeth are, what direction they're sitting in, you can hold it up in the light. When you're loading your saw frame, you want the teeth facing down and out. Out meaning away from you, because you're cutting forward. So down towards the handle and out. So you need to take a look at your teeth here. If you have trouble seeing it, you can use Optivisors, which is a tool I can reference to you. I have one here if you need that. It's basically kind of just magnifiers that you can put over the front of your glasses if you have them, or and a lot of jewelers use them to kind of really get in there and see what you're doing. If you don't happen to have that, you can actually pull it against your fabric like that, and when you're pulling down, it grabs onto your fabric, then you're like, okay, it's in the right direction. So I'm gonna load this standing up, but there's many different ways of doing it. So when I load my saw frame here, I'm going to start by making sure that the actual blade sits all the way here at the bottom, hand tight. Now take a notice, there's no tension on this blade, and it barely fits into the top jaw. We're gonna push it forward, 3/4 of the way up, and then drop it down in there. I'm maintaining that tension until I get it tight enough here. Then I release the tension, and if it's too tight, it'll do what it just did. It broke.
Now, it did look very fragile. I was wondering about that. How often do you break saw blades?
Saw blades? So when you buy saw blades, they actually come in a dozen. You cannot buy less than a dozen. Okay, and they come like that. They break very often. They are sensitive. The tension being that we're setting up here is really important. You can't saw properly without the tension being spot on. So if you break that tension, they will break. And so when you're first learning, you will break many. Don't feel bad about it. It happens to everyone. Obviously, I still break them, and it's just a matter of kind of getting in your happy sawing place, as some people like to refer to, because if you don't move just right, they will break, because the tension is straight up and down here. If you push it side to side at all, that's when it's gonna break. And because I pulled it so tight, I pulled it apart.
And because they come in packs of 12, do you think 12 is enough to get started on a project? How many really should you have to hand?
I honestly, to start, well, I would say 3 dozen is actually good. You know, most jewelers buy a gross, let's just put it that way. It's always good to have extra laying around. So, I'm sorry? What's a gross? Gross is a dozen of a dozen, so it would be 12 of these bundles, basically. So, I flicked it. Hear that kind of high-pitched noise? That actually means it's tight enough. If you flick it and you see that it can move easily side to side, that means it's not tight enough. Also, if it makes kind of a flump flump, like it's a little lower tone than this high pitch ding, then you know that it's not tight enough. It means you're close though, so don't feel like you're totally off of what you're doing. But it still means it could be a hair tighter, okay? So, but for what we're doing, we actually can't have the blade slipped in there, but this is how you normally load the saw frame. So, I'm gonna take it out of the top there, have a seat. So we're sitting here with a bench pin. This is a standard jeweler's tool that allows you to kind of hold on to your material while you're sawing, so it has the grips on each side, but then allows you to move your saw frame around, hence that V there. So I'm actually going to take my template. We're going to do one section at a time. Slip my blade through the hole with the pattern not facing me, okay? So I'm not looking at it right now. So when I pull it upright, it'll be facing me. So I'm slipping it down way on the end of the saw frame here. That way, it's not gonna prevent me from getting the proper tension on the blade. So once again, 3/4 of the way up. I might need to move that a little to the side there so I can get that nice and tight. And now we're ready to saw, okay? Now, we're gonna need a little lubrication to help us saw. That's what this is here. Sometimes this is referred to as burr life. What we have here, this particular name is Stay Sharp. It's basically a lubrication that allows your blade to cut easily, as well as kind of help kick the dust of the metal out of the way, so you keep a smooth cut. So when you use it, you just kind of run it up the blade like that. Creates a little dust, no big deal. Then,
I think we missed that. Do you actually put it on the blade or on the
yeah,
on the
so
material?
I push it up against the blade and rubbed. And since it's so soft, it's like a paraffin wax based, it just kind of left all this little chatter there. And on top of my piece. So you just blow it out of the way so you can see what you're doing, and you can start cutting. Now, notice that I'm sitting fairly low. It's important to actually have your shoulders nearly the same height of the bench pin. So please keep that in mind, because it makes it easier for you to hold this at a 90-degree angle. So straight up and down motion. So we're gonna start. Now, when you change direction, so it's a simple downward stroke. My saw blade seems like it's a little loose, so I might tighten it a hair here. I'm gonna back up. So when you need to back up out of your saw, just go back to an area where it's kind of in that loose hole there, so you don't have to worry about it. And sometimes that, this can happen. Your saw frame can, if it's older, sometimes it'll shift around. Sometimes these bolts will actually get a little loose. So I'm just gonna re-tighten that. Yeah, now we're back in business. So jogging back into place. I'm not really putting pressure down. I'm just kind of slipping back in. Now, when you're sawing, it's on the downstroke. So kind of be mindful of that. You're pushing down and you're pushing forward. Now, when you change directions, though, you can't be cutting while you're doing that. So I'm going to simply, it's always easier to cut sawing forward. So I'm going to just jog in place. I'm just moving this up, straight up and down. And I'm shifting the metal so that I'm sawing straight. All right, now we can cut. Now this particular pattern is really good pattern to practice with, because you have to practice straight lines and angle changes. So we're changing direction again, jogging in place, cutting forward, changing angle again. Jogging in place, and cutting forward. If you find that you're not cutting as smoothly as before, you can add lubrication in the middle of your cut by just holding your saw frame there and running that up against the blade again. Always make sure the dust is out of the way so you can see what you're doing. Yes.
Sorry, how does the technique change, or does it change if you're sawing straight lines instead of curves?
So curves, and actually I'm about to saw a curve, so that's perfect timing.
Oh, perfect.
So curves, the trickiness with, so you have your straight lines, you're just going forward. Your angles, you have to do the jog in place, like I just mentioned. With curves, it's the trickiest line structure, I will admit, because you have to continuously move your saw frame, aka saw, as well as actually move the metal at the same time. I'm gonna do one more shape after this, one next to it, and I'll start with that curve, and you can kind of see that movement. bam, right through that cut. So when you get to the end of a cut, since we're doing piercing, you don't have to necessarily worry about the blade jumping forward because there's metal to protect you. But let's say you were cutting an exterior shape here, which I could show you in a minute. It pushes forward. You're using all this force. You're cutting down and it's moving forward. So it wants to jump forward. So always be aware of where your fingers are. That way you don't have to worry about it jumping forward into your hand.